This is KHOI 89.1 Story City Ames, and you're listening to I Am Able Iowa, where we discuss the ability and disability. I'm Nancy Baker Curtis, public school teacher, board president for the ARC of Iowa, and parent advocate. I will be your host for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Zach Meekum, who comes to us from Allies and Advocacy. Today, we have some really interesting guests joining us. We have June Klein Bacon, who is joining us from the Brain Injury Association of Iowa. Erika Brouilettte, did I say that correct? Brouilettte, excuse me. Erika Brouilettte, she is a mother of three. She is a wife and a caregiver to an individual with a traumatic brain injury. She also has an amazing blog or podcast, that I'm excited to share. And then our final guest for today is JJ Stone. JJ's been on the show before. JJ is a person who is living with the traumatic brain injury, and he lives in Sioux City, Iowa. I want to thank you all so very much for joining us today on the show. I'm really excited to be able to talk about traumatic brain injuries and brain injury in general, to recognize this wonderful month of March and Brain Injury Awareness Month. So thank you all for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start with June. June comes from us from the Brain Injury Association of Iowa. And June, can you just share a little bit about what brain injury is and what are the different types of brain injuries that people might experience that live in our beautiful state?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Nancy, for having us and having us join today. When we talk about brain injury, we really talk about it with an umbrella term called acquired brain injury. This is something that describes both traumatic and non-traumatic brain injuries. So for context, traumatic brain injuries, or TBI, are often caused by an external force, something like a fall, a car crash. We hear about it with sports injuries. Concussions are a common type of traumatic brain injury. Non-traumatic brain injuries then are caused more by an internal factor. So you might think of like stroke, lack of oxygen with a cardiac event, or near drowning. It can also be caused by infections, tumors, overdoses even can be considered a non-traumatic brain injury.
Wow. That's really informative, because I was just thinking about my mom, who was a stroke survivor, and I just always associated that stroke being so traumatic for me as being a traumatic brain injury. But according to what you just shared and educated us on, that's not exactly correct. While it is traumatizing for all those involved, right? The clinical definitions are a little different than what we might expect.
Right.
And it seems like, just based off that definition, brain injuries are probably more common than we really realize, huh?
Yes, it is quite a bit more common than we realize. There's data that points to about 25%, or 1 in 4, will experience a brain injury event at some point in their lifetime. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they become disabled as a result of that injury. About 1 in 60%, or I'm sorry, 1 in 60 are living with a permanent or long-term disability as a result of brain injury. But like I said, about 1 in 4, or 25% of us, have lifetime history of a brain injury event.
Well, yeah, because you said a concussion is even technically a brain injury. And as you say that, that makes so much sense to me. You know, as a school teacher, we do concussion protocols. We learn to recognize the signs of concussions, because, as you said, our young athletes are often exposed to those dangers. And without proper protocols and policies, people could get really hurt, right?
Yes. Yeah. The reality is TBI, traumatic brain injury, is the leading cause of death and disability in children and adolescents, particularly when we look at ages 0 through 4. So when you think about, our little toddlers learning how to walk, rolling around, learning how to walk and crashing into the coffee table, those kinds of things. And then we look at ages 14 through 19. And you can often think about whether that's sports related events, playground, bicycle crashes. We've also got, that's the age range where we're learning how to drive cars. And so that's definitely a time period that can be pretty challenging when it comes to experiencing brain injury. And then we also know that brain injuries disrupt how our brains work. And so when we think about development with our kiddos, it can change the trajectory of our brain development. It can change things about us physically, emotionally, cognitively. So it's a pretty complex situation and is different for every person that experiences it.
As you say that, it seems so logical and like such common sense. But I suppose if you've never been exposed to it, it's not so common, right? And so that's why it's so important that we have this dialogue and this discussion, and we really bring awareness to this month and what brain injury is in general. June, this wasn't scripted, but I'm just really curious. How did you get involved in this work? What drew you to this field? Because this seems like you would have to be a person who really cares deeply and wants to evoke change in order to do this role. So, what brought you to Brain Injury Alliance Iowa?
Absolutely. So, I honestly fell into the brain injury community. No pun intended there. I had been working for a provider in the community doing supported community living, and there was an opening in the brain injury department. And I just fell in love with the work. I fell in love with the people and the opportunities to help people develop strategies to manage some of those lifelong changes that they had experienced as a result of their injury. And I attended one of our conferences in 2007 and absolutely fell in love with the mission of the Brain Injury Association of Iowa and what it was doing on a wider scale to help people understand brain injury, help people connect to the supports and services that they needed. And it wasn't until 2013 that a position opened up that fit for me. I started as a resource facilitator and moved my way through the organization, and now I'm executive director.
I love that you were called to the work. It speaks volumes of your character, June, and I really respect you for that. And I imagine someone like JJ probably had exposure or came into contact someone like you when you were working in your role prior to becoming the director, correct? So JJ, I know you're there listening. Can you share with us a little bit about your story and how you ended up with your specific brain injury?
My specific brain injury happened when I was about a year and a half up to about 2 years old. And during that time, I was actually able to walk early. But what I had done was, naughty boy, I ran behind the car, and my dad was pulling out of the driveway and accidentally ran me over. But from that, I also tell my dad, I don't blame him for that, because he was also the one that pulled me out of where I was trapped and got me to the hospital. And now I'm 49 years old and living with a traumatic brain injury and epilepsy.
And I'm sure that injury, it perfectly fits the scenario that June described, right? You're a young child, you're learning to ambulate and gain independence, you're curious, and there's a sudden event, an accident that happens. Obviously, this is much more serious. It's a car running over you. It's impacted every aspect of your life, though, hasn't it?
It has quite a bit, actually. Originally from the accidents, they never thought I was going to be able to walk or talk. I was in a coma for 3 or 4 days. The brain surgery was very expensive. And the main part of it, from what I always tell people, especially from the suffering of the epilepsy, it has actually prevented me from being like most of you, in a ability to work full time. I actually have a bachelor's degree in broadcasting. I've got to do 26 years in broadcasting here in Iowa, but I've only been able to work on a part-time level. So even though, I went to college, I've achieved, but it's been an effect of me even trying to live independently from working from the level of full-time and being able to even get a person who, full-time working employment and income is a very difficult part of living with a traumatic brain injury that I'll be living with the rest of my life. And especially if I have a seizure, it prevents me from working quite a bit.
With, you said that the traumatic brain injury affects a large portion of your life and that it limits your ability to work full time. So, what does a day for you look like typically? How might it look different than someone else's?
How does it look different?
Yeah, your day-to-day activities. How are they different than, say, somebody living without a brain injury?
Well, I myself, a lot of times I know that there are the rules and the laws of, especially with a person of epilepsy, I know that you have to have an extended period of time that you have to go without having a seizure to even be able to drive. And I took it upon myself years ago not to drive again because the way that my seizures occur whenever they want to. A lot of times in the past year or two, I've only had 2 seizures, but still taking the time. You have to go, I believe, in Nancy or June, is it 6 months now?
I think so,
That you have to
yes.
go?
Yes, 6 months
So,
seizure-free.
and again, that's another reason why it affects me because, again, not being able to work, not being able to have the transportation, even living here in Sioux City, our bus transportation only goes from 6 in the morning to 6 o'clock at night. So right there, it automatically limits my employment capabilities. And the previous place of employment that I was working at for a couple radio stations and TV stations years ago, I used to live downtown in Sioux City, and it was walking distance to those stations. But now it's a little different because of the transportation hours. It's a little different because the increase of not being able to walk outside at night. There are so many different things that interfere with even being able to work, because even recently after COVID, I got back into doing my radio broadcasting career. Worked at a radio station for about 2 or 3 years. And when things started changing to the amount of money you can make to keep benefits or even your SNAP benefit, you're limited on how much you can make. So it kind of forced me to have to quit working to keep some of my benefits.
Those are really hard choices, right? And I have to think that the mental health impact of all of that is so grave, right?
Definitely.
People define themselves by the work they do. They take pride in being able to earn degrees and go to school. And it just feels as though it doesn't feel. It's apparent there are many obstacles in the way of allowing people with disabilities, in particular in the state of Iowa, to be able to work and live and flourish and play. And so I'm honored to have you on the program today, JJ, and I want to thank you for sharing your story. I think it's so very important that people understand that you're having to choose between the supports you need in order to survive, like food and transportation to an employment or to a healthcare appointment, or being able to retain the things that the services that you need. And it's just a non-decision, right? It's a moot point. There is no good option. I want to take a minute and talk to Erika because Erika, I know your story is different and you're coming to us from Colorado. You and I randomly met at a concert at Red Rocks, which is what I love about the disability community is when you're sitting in those ADA sections, suddenly you're all family and you're all friends. Can you share with us just a little bit about your brain injury story and how you're coming to us? Because you're a little different. You're not living personally with a brain injury. You're the caregiver of someone with a brain injury.
Yeah. Thanks, Nancy. So back in October of 2020, in the midst of COVID, we woke up one morning and didn't realize that our life had completely changed. My husband, Shelby, was in a car accident, a single car, ran into a building. We we didn't know this until later on in the day. And when the RN at the hospital called and let me know that they thought they had my husband in the ICU. And we had three young boys. They were 2, 4, and 10 at the time. I say that I threw them at my neighbors and rushed down the road. The only thing that I could recognize him by was his tattoos. He had already undergone emergency brain surgery, and in that moment, I knew that our life had completely changed. He was in the ICU for about 3 weeks, went to a couple different units, went to an LTAC, a long-term acute care hospital, and then eventually made it to Craig Hospital. In those times, we had a lot of conversations with the doctors on whether or not to continue care. And life is really freaking different. He is in a wheelchair. He is G-tube fed completely for all of his nutrition, all of his meds. He is nonverbal. They say he's paralyzed on the right side, but although things are coming back. So in the blink of an eye, I was a wife to a man who provided to becoming a full-time caregiver, the decision maker for our entire home, the advocate for all of his cares, all of his day-to-day living, and the only parent to make every life choice for our kids.
Wow, that's nothing, right? Like,
Right.
that's no big deal,
Not at
right?
all. Hmm.
No, not at all. And I think that your stories and the information that June shared previously speak to why it's so important we have this conversation and the importance of this awareness month. Because we know in our disability community, we're all just an accident or we're aging into disability. And having those long-term support services in place are so important when it comes to keeping our loved ones in our home. And I think that's one of the things that I admire most about you, Erika, is that you're able to keep your family in your home. So I think Zach would ask this question. He just asked it of JJ. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your day is like?
Sure. It took a lot of me giving up control. I thought that once I brought him home, I was going to be able to keep all of the plates spinning, everything in our home completely the same as it was before accident. I was going to do all of his cares. He is completely dependent on others for everything from morning until night. And so quickly, I was humbled and found that I was not able to do that. Um, so we were still in the midst of COVID. So finding someone who wanted to come into your home and be able to do all of the intensive cares for him was a struggle. We ended up hiring one of his techs from Craig Hospital to come, but it was just 4 hours a week, 6 hours a week. And so it really took us a whole year before we were able to find someone full time to help. Um, while I was also continuing to try to pick up the pieces that fell apart while he and I were gone. I keep talking about COVID because our kids were not able to be they were not able to see their dad for 6 whole months. So that caused a lot of trauma. Like, not just daddy's in an accident, he's a different person, but mommy and daddy were completely absent in their lives for 6 months. Um, so we had a lot of healing and a lot of repair. I talk a lot with the people in my circle that not only is he a completely different person, but I am too. I am not the same person that I was before Shelby's accident, before traumatic brain injury became our life. So we do have a caregiver that comes now, 43 hours a week, that helps with caring for him. And so she brings him to all of his appointments. She gets him up, she feeds him. Um, I have chosen those hours so that I can take care of our home and I can take care of my business, and not take completely away from our kids. That was a really big balancing act, trying to figure out what was the best for our entire family in providing care for him, but also being present for our kids and having a functioning family unit. So this is what has worked best for us. And then the evening cares are for me and the weekend cares. So he travels with us to every sporting event of our kids. They're very active in hockey and baseball and soccer and all of the things. And so now he gets to be a part of that.
Thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
because I see June in the background just nodding her head like this is a familiar story. Have you heard stories like this before, June?
Yeah, it's um, one of the most humbling parts of the work that we do at BIA is hearing from families and from people that have had injuries that their lives are changed in an instant. And particularly for those that have a more severe injury where, we often talk about brain injury as a silent epidemic because there's often, people that have these injuries and their life doesn't change dramatically. But we have this set of folks that call us that, their parent, their child, their spouse, is in the hospital and their life has changed, in an instant. And just recognizing the chronic condition and the chronicity of brain injury, and that there's going to be change for lifelong. There's going to be different situations lifelong that a family is going to interact with and engage with because of that one incident.
Well, and I love conversations like these because disability of any kind does change your life, right? It's a disruption of whatever patterns you were used to before. Um, but I think hearing these stories is super important because while disability changes your life isn't over. And commonly that's, uh, I think people's perception of like what they would feel like if they were in this position. So I just love to hear from all three of you. Like what would you say to somebody whose perception is like, if I had this happen to me, my life would be over?
I hear that a lot. I had, members of our friend groups, of our family, like, I don't know how you do this. Has got to be so hard. Um, Maybe a little bit of judgment of the way we do things, or they wouldn't do things this way. And I continue to remind people and remind myself, like if I see someone's situation as a caregiver, as a wife who's gone through the trauma, like this, you don't know how you're going to function in this life until you've been handed this life. And so I just say, by the grace of God, um, and a whole lot of grace, because I mess up every single day, and our life is definitely not perfect. But I'm going to get up every single day and I'm going to make the best of each and every single day. And I'm going to teach my children that just because we have daddy's disability that is really freaking hard, we're not going to miss out on the good things. Like we got to meet Nancy and Charlie and their beautiful family doing the things that we love, seeing the band that we enjoy. And just because daddy's in a wheelchair and he is unable to speak, he can still communicate. We can see it in his eyes. He can give us a thumbs up and a thumbs down. And they've been able to see the progress, but I think that also gives them the true compassion for other people who may be going through something similar.
You've lived your whole life, JJ, with your brain injury. You know no different life. So when someone says to you, "Oh, this is so hard, I don't think I could do it," how do you respond, JJ?
I kind of going with what June was saying, even right there. There's one thing that one of my grandparents always taught me when I was raising and getting older throughout the years with my epilepsy is God created or God has you go through something because he knows you can handle it. And that's kind of why besides doing my years of broadcasting, I've also been an advocate for people of epilepsy and brain injury, even working with the Brain Injury Alliance and Association when I was on an advisory council for brain injury when Terry Branstad was around. And you got to go through so much, but when someone comes to you and says they can't handle it, you got to look at them and just say, hey, don't give up. You still got plenty more time. And I always tell them that God made you deal with this because he knows you can handle it. So definitely don't give up on it.
I identify with so many things you both said, so thank you.
JJ, it's a follow-up question on that is like, what is it that you kind of look forward to in a day? What is it that fills your life up? Is it that advocacy? You know what?
Very much advocacy because, I mean, even times, I'm not sure if Lisa is still a part of the Brain Injury Alliance. I've had several different representatives, even when Jeff was on the advisory council with me. But being an advocate is another way for me. It's my way to give back to God because I know being run over by a car, having a traumatic brain injury, and living through that, I know God wanted me to continue to keep fighting. I know God wanted me to be an advocate, and that's why I continued being it, even doing it with my years of broadcasting. I know he wants me to do it. I know he wants me to keep doing it, and that's what I've been doing. I've even recently moved into an apartment complex that is based on disability, and several of the people in there actually enjoy sitting down and talking with me, and I tell them, associations or people to talk to that might be more of helpful and not to give up, because another side effect with being on disability is depression. It's a big, big hurdle to even try to jump over that because it makes you feel like you're a waste of time and you're not worth it, but you are. You're definitely worth it.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to I Am Able Iowa, and we're talking with our guests today all about what it is to have a brain injury, and we're recognizing Brain Injury Awareness Month here in March. My guests are amazing. I've got June Klein Bacon, who's coming to us from the Brain Injury Association of Iowa. I've got JJ Stone, who is a person with a brain injury, and he's from Sioux City, Iowa. And I have Erika Brouilettte, and she's coming to us from Colorado, and she is the wife and a caregiver of a traumatic brain injury survivor. And I just think this conversation is so intriguing. And I think, Erika, you said something about our whole family became disabled, right? Our whole family changed. And JJ, you said something about how important it is for you to be an advocate and how coming together and helping others is really what gives you purpose in a time when you find it difficult to work. And I think this really challenges some of the ideas that people may have about what it means to live with a disability or to have a brain injury. It's emotional. It's traumatic, as the name says. It impacts every person differently. Disability is a spectrum. I think, though, what we do here on I Am Able Iowa is we remove stigma by talking about difficult and challenging conversations. And so I want to continue this conversation and talk a little bit about the impacts that disabilities have on children and families. And I think that this is something that I struggle with as a parent. You know, I turn to my daughter and say, well, we need to be strong. But those aren't the right words to say. And what I need to tell her is, baby, it's okay to cry. And it's okay to need help and someone to talk to. And so I want to talk a little bit about the effect and how brain injury impacts the children that you have. And so, Erika, I turn to you as the parent of three beautiful kids who had their life suddenly turned upside down. How do you best support them? And how has this impacted their lives?
Oh, it has impacted their lives. I mean, every orifice of their lives. Supporting them, I got them all in therapy. Like before Shelby was even out of the hospital, we were all going to therapy and um, working through what was going on. Although, like our 2 year old didn't really get it, right? He's now 8 and he doesn't remember his daddy before the accident. So he doesn't remember the able-bodied daddy who, was playing in the sand with him, climbing the mountains, all the things. Um, I think he's the most compassionate towards his dad. Like he loves to do his cares. He loves to put his socks on and help him get ready. Um, and probably is just the one who gravitates more towards daddy. I think because that's all he remembers. For our 4 year old, then he's now 10. He also has a disability, and so we are working through our own things with him and his abilities. um, but he tends to shy away from his dad, because they were probably the closest, and it's hard to read exactly what's going on in his little head. But he'll be like, no, I'm okay. If I ask him if he wants to go do something with his daddy, I encourage it all the time, like, hey, why don't you go sit and read that book to daddy? Or why don't you do your homework with daddy? Or go show him this. He's a little more hesitant. Now, our oldest is now 16, and he is probably impacted the most. He spent a lot of time out in that garage working on cars and motorcycles and lawnmowers and all the things. And all of a sudden, his best friend is no longer able to help him. And right now, he's out working, not right at the moment, he's at school, but in this season, he has bought himself a pickup and he is out there working on it himself. And those are the things that get him really tied up inside and frustrated and upset with our situation is his dad would be out there helping him with his truck. And so I've found men in our lives, friends from church or from our friends groups, who will come over and be that person, but it's still a void for him. That should be his dad. Things like when we go to support a friend at a concert or at a play, and we get our tickets, but they're not up front with the rest of the crew because daddy has a wheelchair and the handicap accessible is not with everyone else. Those poor me moments. And like you said, to say you have to be strong. Um, is not the right words, but it's like what we want to say because we don't want to have to get that vulnerable, right? Like we as moms, we try to stay strong, but we also are entitled to feel sorry for ourselves a little bit, and not be okay with having to be over here in the section that is made for the wheelchair. When we go to panic shows, he used to go all the way down to the front with his dad and run down the stairs, and now he can't, right? Like his dad's stuck up here at the top of
The
the
mountain.
bleachers. Yeah, at the top of the
The
mountain.
mountain. There's
And
only
he
two accessible rows,
and
the
he
front
can't
or the
enjoy,
back.
yeah, enjoying is different, right? So I've worked really hard to find things like my kids will go to North Dakota, our kids will go to North Dakota to be with their grandparents for a month in the summer. And so one summer, Shelby and I spent uh, part of that time going and exploring accessible hiking. We went to different campgrounds to see how they were because I didn't want to travel with the entire family and them be disappointed. Like, oh, that's cool, it's accessible, but we can't get to the top of the mountain. Where out here in Colorado, they do have a lot of them that do allow for us to get to the top. So there's a lot of proactiveness that I have to do to stay ahead of the game. We traveled our first family vacation, I think it was 3 years ago. We went down to Florida and I had to call the hotel. They were probably so sick of me, but I would call every day, like, are you sure the handrails are at the right side of the toilet that he can use them? Because I don't want to get there and be upset or, not be able to get to where we need to go or have him do the things he needs to do that are going to hinder our enjoyment of our vacation because of daddy's disability. So it takes a lot, like JJ said, of advocacy and research to be able to allow our family to do the things that normal families do. It's a lot of work.
June, I feel like you should chime in here because I feel like that's why we have the Brain Injury Association. And I'm sure there are chapters in other states, not just here in Iowa. But I would like for you to specifically talk, June, that the challenges that Erika's describing and that JJ describes. This is exactly what your organization supports families with, right?
Absolutely. So the term that comes to mind as both JJ and Erika were talking is ambiguous loss or ambiguous grief. It's being able to name the and grieve the what could have been, the what ifs. The, if this didn't happen, my dad would have been able to be in the garage with me.
The what was,
The
yeah.
what is, yeah, and that's something through our facilitation program that is a really powerful and hard and rewarding part of the work that we do because we can have those conversations with people and support them in processing the loss that they're experiencing and working with them to turn to what's next. So looking for glimmers of hope, and things like looking for campsites and trails that are accessible, and how do we help you figure that out, and how do we help you get to be able to do the activities that you wanted to be able to do, whether that be thinking about work or thinking about play or living, or we've been using, the live, work, play, flourish tagline here in Iowa, and that is what we get to be able to do in those conversations. And you're right, there are associations and brain injury networks all over the country. Most states have one. Colorado has an association that we work with quite a bit as well. So yeah, that just as both JJ and Erika were talking, that idea of ambiguous grief or ambiguous loss was something that just kept kind of hitting me. Of, that is something that we try to help people name, because when they're experiencing that loss and that grief, they don't always have direction on how to figure out what that feeling is.
I want to thank you. I didn't know it had a name. I didn't know there was a clinical term. I just know that I grieve, and my son doesn't have a brain injury. And so, that grief sometimes makes me feel ashamed, like I shouldn't grieve the same way other people do. And our shame dies when we tell our stories in safe places. So thank you for giving me a name to that grief.
Absolutely.
As a person with a disability, right? Um, I can say firsthand, 100% true. Life, disability isn't fair, right? Nor is life. Um, and I think we have to acknowledge the inherent unfairness, right? Like, and I don't think there should be any shame in acknowledging that inherent unfairness. Um, I think, and I'm hearing this from you guys over and over again. It's like there is a sadness about what could have been, but there's also so much love and compassion, and that's the part that I really try to retain, focus on, especially in conversations like this, because I don't want a non-disabled person to come away feeling like, uh, you know, um, if I have a disability, I will be a burden to my family, you know? And I'm just curious what your thoughts on that is.
Yeah, I think, Zach, that's a great question. And I think when we talk about misconceptions around brain injury in particular, um, you know, one of the pieces that we're constantly talking about is, how do we look to the future? How do we look to building new neural pathways? And we talk about neuroplasticity and the hope that is within that, in terms of, looking for opportunities to take a look at functional changes that have happened, and are there strategies that we can develop, whether that be a learned skill for the person with disability or with brain injury, or with family members, to figure out, how do we keep moving forward to have a meaningful life, and be able to engage in our communities and with our families. So, I think that I like to approach our work with a lot of hope. Yes, it's hard, and it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to sit with that. And how do we think about the hope that is, to be able to help people connect to the support that they need, whether that be a natural support, whether that be building a new skill, or paid support for those that need it.
And I think what I take from what you're saying, June, is taking your grieving, and then putting that grief into action, something tangible. And Erika, you did just that, right? You and your community, you've all developed a podcast, right? Called The Real Lives of TBI Wives. Can you tell us a little bit more about your podcast? I mean, you even have a children's book that you're coming up with as
Yeah,
a part of your journey and in your new pathway and with your new skills.
for sure. So, it was about a year ago. I talked about how we had all been in therapy, and I just hadn't found a therapist that I worked well with, right? And it's hard sitting on a therapist's couch or rolling into their office and pouring yourself out and recognizing that it doesn't work for you. And I was, they talk about the straw that breaks the camel's back, and I was almost to that straw. I was in a very dark place. And I just couldn't bring myself to go to a therapy's office. I just like I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had come across a friend on social media's post, and he was a life coach, and he had, said something about a free consultation. And I was like, all right, what do I have to lose? Right. And in that 30 minutes, I recognized that like this is what I needed to help me break out of what I was going through. And so I had worked with him in just processing all of my ambiguous grief and life and all of the heaviness of what is. And I started going participating in a mastermind group with him, and we had a gal come and teach us about podcasting. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is what I'm here to do." Because early on in Shelby's recovery, I knew that I was placed here to help other people. And I didn't know how it was going to be, but I just knew that like I was here for more, right? And so I started brainstorming about a podcast, and I have so many avenues within my life, not just as a brain injury wife, but in sobriety. And like I didn't know which avenue I was going to go to do a podcast, but I knew this is what I was going to do. And so my brain just started spinning, and I thought about the support that I had or didn't have, right, in going through this, and how through Shelby's journey, he had people supporting him and caring for him and helping him heal. And I was part of that, but like who did I have to help me? And there was all of this processing to do. And so that's where I recognized that it was the wives, the caregivers that needed that support. And so I birthed the real lives of TBI wives. And that is where I give women a platform to share their story beyond their husband's injury, because we honest and truly become their brain injury. That's our life. And so in recognizing like how healing that is to share my story and be able to tell that to the world and offer a platform for other women to do so, it's just been so beautiful. We have over 5,000 downloads in a year, and the feedback that I'm getting from all of these women and just how healing it has been, and they just haven't been asked those questions of like, how are you doing through all of this?
And I think that's so important on so many levels. Um, First of all, to just give them an identity of their own,
Yeah.
right? Like everyone should has the right to have that. Um, but then also like just emphasizing that self care. Um, and I'm thinking a lot about this stuff right now because I'm about 6 months into a relationship, and we're kind of now at that phase of like, okay, if this continues, what does our life look like?
Yeah.
And I've been emphasizing to her, like, I think during the week I should have personal care come in. You've got a job you love. You need to keep that job. You've got all of these things that are important to you. I don't want, I want to make sure that I'm adding to your life, right? Um, I like thinking about those things is super important to me because I don't want to get into a situation where my needs take away from her autonomy and individuality. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. And in having those conversations through the podcast, I recognized that there's so many women who are developing autoimmune diseases, putting themselves in the emergency room because they're not caring for themselves. And so then I developed an online community called Reclaim, where I help women to reclaim their identity beyond their husband's brain injury. And then I recognized that we still had a lot to process with our kids, a lot of things that I didn't have the time or the capacity. Plus, I was still drinking when Shelby was in the hospital. That was the peak of my addiction. And so I recognize that I was not allowing for my kids to process what had changed their lives. So that's where I came out with the Reclaim activity book, is to help parents, grandparents, whomever, their guardian, help those kids process what they're going through, whether it be a hospital stay or, their parent having a traumatic accident like their dad. And with doing that, my kid, especially the two littles, it is more geared towards little kids. Just giving them that book and that opportunity to invite me to sit down and color with them has opened conversations and like playful competition, because there's tic-tac-toe and there's the squares game. And those are times that I didn't have with the kids when we were going through it. But that doesn't mean that we can't process it now. And it's been such a blessing just to our family. I'm so excited to hear how it blesses other people and their families.
I think that this is so interesting. And I think what you're talking about is something that I've even experienced myself in kind of my own way. I, for years, thought I had to somehow reclaim the time I lost with my daughter while Charlie was in the hospital. And then realized you can't reclaim that time. That time is gone. And it is just a hole in a stamp or a tattoo of what happened. They're battle wounds, right? And so then, much like what you said, I shifted my focus onto what about the now and being present in the now and building the now. And I think that that's so important to any grief you're processing. It doesn't have to be a brain injury. It doesn't have to be that you don't have a diagnosis or you can't find work, right? It's grief and trauma have to be processed. And when you process them with others, it helps you to find your community. And I think that that's something that also happens in our disability. Individuals become isolated. And whether that's because of their care duties or much like our friend JJ, lack of access, right, to transportation, isolation can really cause a lot of negativity and physical ailments like the ones that you described that these wives and caregivers are experiencing. We just have a few moments left with our show, and this show is so captivating. I feel as though I could have all of you on as individual guests and fill an hour with all of you. And so I just want to give our listeners someone who perhaps they might know who is living with a brain injury. How can they best support them? And JJ, I want to start with you because we haven't heard from you from a little bit. So as you come into the life of others who are dealing with their loved ones or friends that have brain injuries, what would you suggest to them is the best way they could support them?
As in,
Or
support
you,
them
your
personally, or
yeah, or just, what advice could you give to someone as they encounter someone with a brain injury? And what would you suggest that they do to help them as they deal with that grief and get through that time?
I would definitely tell them, like I myself, definitely pay attention to it. It's not something small, because even back in well, the beginning of January, even just trying to get to a bus stop to try to get to the grocery store. I even, walking down the sidewalk, I found a patch of ice and I slipped back and landed on my back and hit my head. And having a traumatic brain injury, it enhances you to have like a concussion so much more easier because of your traumatic brain injury. And falling on my back, I ended up having a small concussion. I couldn't even get up momentarily because I was confused. And I thank God that, seriously, wasn't even 30 seconds. All of a sudden, a person saw me fall and fly up in the air, and they actually came and saw me and pulled in the driveway and called 911. And even at that moment, I waited for the fire department to show up, and when they came, they couldn't even come up on the driveway, so I slid down the driveway to get down to the fire department to have them take me to the hospital. You got to understand your disability 110%. And that is something that I will tell to everyone in every disability. Understand your disability. Understand what you need to do to make it worth living all the time. Because it is a good living life. You just have that extra hurdles.
That's a great message. Be kind, show compassion. What would you say, Erika? What would you tell someone briefly if you could?
Well, two facets, I think. If you were to have someone in your life to develop a brain injury, don't stop asking. Don't ask, what can I do for you? Because that's a very overwhelming question for someone who's gone through trauma. But could I bring you lunch today? And if they say no, maybe ask a month later. Processing is hard. And I just have seen a lot of people drift away, and that's really sad. So just continue asking, continue trying to be a part of their life. And if you find yourself a caregiver or a brain injury survivor, find your people. Like Nancy had mentioned earlier, it is, and JJ, I think we've all talked about isolation, Zach. It is so isolating, and it's so easy to stay in your bubble at home, and it is so unhealthy. So find your people. We have Zooms, right? Like this right here. If that's all of the village that you can have, at least you're having personal interaction, and what that's going to do for your mental health is such a blessing. So find your village.
Fully agree with you on that.
June, where can they find more information about the Brain Injury Association of Iowa?
Absolutely. We're available to any Iowan that has experienced brain injury, their family members, chosen care partners, as well as professionals that might be, working with people with brain injury in the field. Our website is biaia.org. You can email us at info@biaia.org, or leave us a message, and we'll call you back at 855-444-6443. And we're also active on Facebook as well as LinkedIn.
Thank you, June. And I know you'll be down at the Capitol next Wednesday with the Iowa Disability Policy Alliance, so they can check out your Facebook page if they want to join us at that event.
Absolutely.
I want to thank everyone for being on our show today. This is KHOI, Story City Ames, and you've been listening to I Am Able Iowa. I Am Able Iowa airs the first and last Saturday morning of each month at 9 a.m. on KHOI 89.1 FM. You can also hear us streaming live online at khoifm.org. We invite you to share your comments, questions, and program ideas with us at doug@thearcofiowa.org. And if you visit www.thearcofiowa.org, you will find previous episodes and more information about our program. I Am Able Iowa is produced by the Arc of Iowa, headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa, with local chapters here in Ames and across the state. Thank you for listening, and until next time, this is Nancy Baker Curtis and Zach Meekum saying, "You are able, Iowa."